Welcome to Iraqi Dinar Update, your go-to source for the latest news, expert insights, and real-time developments on Iraq's currency, economy, and financial reforms. Whether you're a long-time investor or just curious about the dinar, you're in the right place. When we examine the processes involved in modern monetary reform, it is essential to distinguish between destructive monetary practices and those that seek to add value and stability to a nation's economy. One of the most misunderstood and often mischaracterized measures in economic discussions is the concept of lopping a currency. That is, the act of removing zeros from a nation's banknotes, usually after a period of high inflation or economic dislocation. While some may loosely refer to this action as a form of reform, in practice, it often reflects a failure of reform, a desperate cosmetic measure taken in the absence of structural economic growth or institutional trust. It is not a value-generating act, nor does it constitute a policy aimed at enriching a country's citizens or strengthening a national currency. To the contrary, it can easily erode what little confidence remains in that currency if it is not executed with a broader, credible program of reform in place. Let us be clear, lopping off zeros is not monetary reform. It is not equivalent to revaluation. It is not an indication of economic strength, nor is it a sign that a country is moving toward a more powerful place in the global financial system. Instead, it is most often a reflection of the opposite, a history of hyperinflation, mismanagement, or collapse that has left the currency so devalued that denominations become unwieldy, embarrassing, or impractical. It is, in essence, a reset on paper without necessarily a corresponding improvement in purchasing power, exchange rate policy, or fiscal integrity. When people say a government has lopped its currency, what they are saying is that the country has reached a point where a currency note's face value, often in the tens of thousands or millions, no longer makes economic sense. Thus, authorities issue new notes with fewer zeros, but the net effect in most cases is that the new notes buy the same as the old ones. Nothing of real value has changed unless deeper reforms are also implemented. Contrast this with real monetary reform, especially in the case of countries that are resource-rich, geopolitically significant, and actively engaged in rebuilding their economic institutions. Iraq and Iran are both examples of countries that have faced enormous challenges in the past decades: wars, sanctions, political instability, and economic mismanagement, but they are not necessarily following the same path when it comes to currency policy. Iran's currency, whether we refer to it as the rial or the tomon, has become one of the lowest valued in the world. The country has struggled with years of international sanctions, loss of oil revenues, capital flight, and inflation. As a result, the rial has eroded in both perception and real value, and attempts to switch to the tomon or lop off zeros have largely been seen as attempts to manage appearance more than substance. There is no doubt that Iran possesses tremendous natural wealth and a highly educated population. However, the rial is emblematic of how far a currency can fall when monetary credibility is lost and structural reform is not fully enacted or trusted by the global financial system. Now compare this with Iraq, a country often viewed through the same lens of post-conflict recovery, but which has taken a noticeably different path in recent years, particularly in the realm of central banking and monetary policy. The Iraqi dinar, despite the many pressures the country has faced since 2003, remains significantly more valued than the Iranian rial or tomon. This is not merely a technicality or a relic of the past. It reflects a deliberate policy approach by the Central Bank of Iraq to preserve the dinar's nominal value while gradually working toward a reformed financial system. Instead of lopping zeros, Iraq has retained a relatively stable exchange rate, used dollar auctions to manage currency flows, and begun serious modernization efforts across the banking sector. The goal here is not to destroy value and start again, but to enhance value from within the current framework, through stability, regulatory improvements, and growing integration into the international financial system. This brings us back to the idea of value, not just in monetary terms, but in policy, perception, and planning. Iraq is a very rich country, both in terms of tangible natural resources and in terms of untapped human capital. Iran, too, is resource-rich, but the divergence in currency value between the two nations is stark. The Iraqi dinar holds significantly more value against the US dollar than the Iranian rial or tomon. And that matters. It matters for trade. It matters for consumer confidence. It matters for attracting foreign direct investment. It matters for bilateral and multilateral negotiations with entities like the IMF or the World Bank. When people conflate redenomination with revaluation, they miss a fundamental distinction. Redenomination, particularly when it involves removing zeros without increasing purchasing power, is a fiscal maneuver to simplify accounting. It does not create wealth. Revaluation, on the other hand, is a recognition of increased monetary strength, economic growth, and international confidence. What Iraq appears to be working toward is the latter. This is not about starting over with a new dinar that's simply easier to count. It's about nurturing conditions in which the dinar's value can appreciate on the global market due to rising GDP, better fiscal policy, expanding non-oil exports, improved governance, and stronger banking transparency. That is a world apart from the conditions that lead to lopping zeros off a battered currency. Iraq is working toward inclusion in systems like SWIFT and the Arab payment platform. It is expanding its digital banking infrastructure. It is increasing its gold reserves. It is holding steady in IMF Article 4 consultations. These are signals that monetary stability is not only being preserved, it is being upgraded. These actions are consistent with a strategy aimed at reinforcing the existing dinar's legitimacy and positioning it for gradual, measured strengthening. The message here is, we believe in our currency, and we are building the foundations for the world to believe in it too. To summarize, though not in a reductionist way, what we are talking about here is not a superficial or reactionary measure like lopping off zeros. We are discussing real monetary policy, rooted in macroeconomic stabilization, aimed at preserving and growing value. When the global community looks at Iraq and sees a dinar that hasn't collapsed despite significant challenges, and sees a central bank that is reforming from within, it should inspire a measure of cautious optimism. The Iraqi dinar is not merely surviving, it is being positioned to thrive in the long run. And that is good. It is good for the country. It is good for economic sovereignty. It is good for restoring regional confidence. And it stands in stark contrast to examples where currencies have been gutted and reissued with little more than a symbolic change in value. Thanks for tuning into Iraqi Dinar Update. If you found this content helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a beat on Iraq's evolving financial landscape. Stay informed, and stay ready.